I couldn't believe it. Jack Del Rio has been fined $100,000 for asking why January 6th is being treated differently than what happened when we had months and months of riots. And I know that there are a lot of you out there that are still coming to grips with the fact that sports has gone fully woke, but here we have a direct penalty being assessed on Jack Del Rio for sharing his personal opinion about the current political process. And I'm reading from what the Washington Commanders said. This just happened in the last 20 minutes or so. This morning, I met with Coach Del Rio to express how disappointed I am in his comments on Wednesday. His comments don't reflect the organization's views and are extremely hurtful to our great community here in the DMV. As we saw last night in the hearings, what happened on the Capitol on January 6, 2021 was an act of domestic terrorism. A group of citizens attempted to overturn the results of a free and fair election. As a result, lives were lost and the Capitol building was damaged. Coach Del Rio did apologize for his comments on Wednesday. He understands the distinction between the events of that dark day and peaceful protest, which are a hallmark of our democracy. I mean, this is like, by the way, I'm pausing right now. This is unbelievable propaganda that is coming out of Washington. He does have the right to voice his opinion as a citizen of the United States, and it most certainly is his constitutional right to do so. However, words have consequences, and his words hurt a lot of people in our community. I want to make it clear our organization will not tolerate any equivalency between those who demanded justice in the wake of George Floyd's murder and the actions of those on January 6th who sought to topple our government. After reflecting on the situation and the circumstances, I have decided to fine Coach Del Rio $100,000, which the team will donate to the United States Capitol Police Memorial Fund. I feel strongly our conversation this morning, he will have a greater understanding for the impact of his language and the values that our team stands for. Colin Kaepernick didn't get fined $1 for protesting in uniform at work. Jack Del Rio got fined for sharing his opinions about January 6th compared to the riots that took place throughout the entire summer. And I want to make this clear. The Black Lives Matter riots caused 30 deaths, 2,000 police injuries, and $2 billion in damages. These were not mostly peaceful protests. These were largely violent protests. And no one has conducted any kind of investigation to determine how did all of these riots happen in the summer of 2020 and who was behind instigating them. Okay? The idea that you cannot point out that this was all summer long a far more violent series of protests, hundreds of them, causing more deaths, more destruction, and more injuries to police than anything that happened on January 6th. You're not even allowed to share that opinion without being fined $100,000, which, by the way, is probably a pretty substantial portion of Jack Del Rio's overall salary. So wait a minute. Where are all the people that said athletes have the right to share their political opinions without any consequences? To my knowledge, no athlete has ever been fined for having a left-wing political opinion, even if he expresses it in uniform at work. Now Jack Del Rio is getting fined for sharing his opinion? I'm sorry. I watched the January 6th hearings. I told you guys yesterday, I believe that anybody who commits a violent act, regardless of what their political motivation might be, should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. If you are a dyed-in-the-wool BLM supporter or if you're a dyed-in-the-wool Trump supporter, if you violate the law, protesting for any reason, leading to a riot, leading to a violent act, leading to any sort of criminal violation, you should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. That's what I believe. We haven't had that happen. Many people who were arrested for violence surrounding the BLM protests were let off with virtually no consequences. In fact, Democrats raised money to bail all of those people out of jail and said, hey, continue to riot and protest, and CNN called them mostly peaceful protests. This is unbelievable propaganda from Ron Rivera and the Washington Commanders franchise. Jack Del Rio actually apologized for his comments. I don't think he should have. I don't think he said anything that was wrong. January 6th, by and large, despite attempts to the contrary, was not a coup. If it was a coup, it was the lamest coup in the history of coups in America, and it was the only coup being led by grandmas with selfie sticks taking pictures of themselves after they were waved into the Capitol by many different Capitol Police guards. All right? I'm not saying that people who made the choice to go into the Capitol shouldn't be punished, but I am saying they were not trying to run a coup and overthrow the government. I'm not aware of any governments that have ever been overthrown by grandmas with selfie sticks and by any group of people that wasn't armed to the teeth. These people were angry on January 6th, just like for hundreds of riots all summer long, many BLM protesters were angry. But it's fair, highly fair, to raise the question, how come there are people still in solitary confinement from January 6th and they aren't even allowed to hardly have any interaction with anyone? And meanwhile, we had Democrats bailing out protesters who were arrested for violent crimes. If anything, I think a lot of you out there right now are watching this and saying, this is pretty ridiculous. Now, I don't think Jack Del Rio will fight it, but if he did, I would have a lot more respect for him if he came out and said, I'm resigning as the Washington Commanders defensive coordinator, and oh, by the way, I'm going to have a press conference, and I'm going to lay out exactly what I think, and I'm going to point out that I'm being directly penalized for sharing my political opinions. Whether you agree or disagree with me, how is it that nobody else in the world of sports has gotten penalized in terms of getting fined for sharing their political opinions? And I did. It's hard to argue that this is anything other than content-based discrimination on behalf of an NFL franchise. And frankly, I don't know if the coaches have a union that represents them. I'm not actually an expert in this, but this is exactly what a union would exist for, to ensure that individuals are not being punished for sharing their political opinions. They're trying to say this is wrong. I actually agree with everything that Jack Del Rio said. Now, I don't know that I would have used the phrase dust up, but it's not like he's a professional spokesperson. It's certainly a very valid question to ask. How is it that we have an investigation going on right now into January 6th, 18 months later, and we haven't had any kind of investigation at all into hundreds of violent riots that caused far more damage, far more deaths, far more injuries than anything that happened on January 6th? Jack Del Rio's point is a good one. If more Republicans had stones, maybe we would. But right now, this is crazy what the Washington Commanders have done to Jack Del Rio.